The corridor outside Trauma Room 3 smelled like antiseptic and burned coffee, the kind that had been sitting on a warmer since dawn. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in the same pale, unforgiving glare. It was just after 6:40 p.m., that awkward hour when day staff and night staff overlapped, when everyone was tired and no one wanted to be responsible for anything unexpected. She stood near the wall with a mop in her hands. At least, that's what everyone assumed. Her uniform was dark, navy blue scrubs, slightly faded from too many washes. Her hair was pulled back neatly, not a strand out of place. No makeup. No jewelry except a simple watch on her left wrist. She wasn't leaning, wasn't scrolling on a phone, wasn't chatting. She simply stood there, eyes lowered, posture calm, as if she were trying to take up as little space as possible. A resident brushed past her without looking. A nurse snapped, "Careful, you're blocking the hall," even though she wasn't. Someone else muttered, "Environmental services should really stick to their schedule." She said nothing. Inside Trauma Room 3, a 62-year-old man lay strapped to a bed, his chest rising unevenly beneath a thin hospital blanket. His name was Richard Halvorsen, though most of the staff only referred to him as the cardiac consult. He'd been brought in an hour earlier with chest pain, dizziness, and a history that read like a ticking time bomb: hypertension, prior MI, borderline diabetes. Still, the room had that dangerous calm. Monitors beeped in steady rhythms. The attending physician, Dr. Klein, stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, confidence radiating from his expensive shoes upward. "We'll keep him for observation," Dr. Klein said. "Run the usual labs. He's stable." A junior nurse hesitated. "Doctor. His EKG earlier." "I saw it," Klein interrupted. "He's fine. Let's not be dramatic." The nurse nodded, chastened, and backed away. In the hallway, the woman with the mop shifted her weight slightly. Her eyes flicked, not to the floor, but toward the monitor through the partially open door. Just for a second. Then back down. A group of interns walked by, laughing too loudly. "Man, I swear, this place would fall apart without the cleaners," one of them joked. Another added, "Yeah, but they always stand around like they're part of the staff." They laughed. The woman didn't react. If she felt anything, she didn't show it. Minutes passed. A new alarm chimed softly from inside the room. The heart monitor's rhythm changed, subtle, but wrong. A jagged hiccup where there shouldn't have been one. The bedside nurse frowned. "That's odd." Dr. Klein glanced at the screen. "Artifact. He probably shifted." The nurse looked at the patient. Richard's face had gone slightly gray, a sheen of sweat forming at his temples. "I don't think." "I said it's fine," Klein snapped. "Page me if it turns into something real." He turned and walked out, nearly colliding with the woman in the hallway. "Hey," he said sharply. "You can't just stand here. Go do your job." She met his eyes then. Calm. Focused. Unoffended, but not small. "I am doing my job," she said quietly. Dr. Klein scoffed. "Right. Just, don't touch anything important." He walked away. The nurse inside the room watched the monitor again. Another blip. Then another. "Sir," she said, touching Richard's shoulder. "Can you hear me?" Richard's eyes fluttered. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The monitor stuttered, then dipped. Flat. For half a second, no one moved. Then the room exploded into motion. "Code Blue," the nurse shouted. "Code Blue, Trauma 3. Feet pounded. Someone slammed the crash cart into the doorway. An intern fumbled with gloves. "Dar." Klein spun around, color draining from his face. "What happened?" he demanded. The monitor screamed its long, unbroken tone. "Start compressions," someone yelled. The nurse climbed onto the bed, hands locked, pressing down hard. 1, 2, 3. "Where's respiratory? Get AP ready. Someone page cardiology." Chaos swallowed the room. In the hallway, staff scattered. Family members were ushered back. Voices overlapped, sharp and panicked. And still. The woman in navy scrubs stood just outside the door. She watched the compressions. The timing. The depth. Her eyes tracked the medication being drawn up, the delay between commands and action. Too slow. The defibrillator pads were placed. Charging. Clear. The patient's body jerked. The monitor spiked, then fell flat again. Dr. Klein swore under his breath. Again. The nurse's arms were shaking now. Sweat dripped from her chin. Another shock. Nothing. In the corner of the room, a young intern whispered, "We're losing him." Outside, the woman took one step forward. "Ma'am," someone barked. "You can't be here." She stopped, but she didn't step back. Her voice, when she spoke, was low but steady. It cut through the noise without competing with it. "You're compressing too shallow," she said. "And you're late on the second dose." The room froze. Every head turned toward her. Dr. Klein stared like she'd just spoken a foreign language. "Excuse me." She met his gaze, unflinching. His rhythm didn't deteriorate suddenly. It was evolving. "You missed the window." A beat of stunned silence. Then someone laughed, short, disbelieving. "Who is this?" Dr. Klein's face hardened. "Security," he snapped. "Get her out of here." But before anyone moved, the monitor let out another shrill alarm, different this time. More erratic. More final. "Flatline." The nurse on the bed whispered, "Oh God." And in that moment, when the room teetered between life and death, the woman everyone thought was just a cleaner took another step forward. For a split second after the flatline, the room existed in a strange limbo, sound without meaning, motion without coordination. The long, unforgiving tone from the monitor filled the air, drilling into everyone's nerves. Hands hovered. Orders tangled over one another. And still, no one moved her. The woman in navy scrubs stepped fully into trauma room 3. Up close, it was clearer now, she wasn't holding a mop. There was no cleaning cart behind her. The assumption had been made and accepted so quickly no one had bothered to look twice. "Ma'am, you need to leave, now," Dr. Klein said, his voice tight, brittle. "This is a medical emergency." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't rush. She simply reached for a pair of gloves from the open box by the door and slid them on with practiced ease. "It's been a medical emergency for the last 9 minutes," she said. "You just didn't treat it like one." The nurse doing compressions faltered, arms trembling. "Doctor, I can't keep." "I've got it," the woman said. She moved in without pushing anyone aside, without drama. Her hands replaced the nurse's seamlessly, fingers interlocked, elbows locked, shoulders aligned perfectly over the patient's sternum. Her first compression landed solid, deep, and exact. The difference was immediate. Anyone who'd ever worked a code felt it in their bones. 1, 2, 3, 4, she counted under her breath, not loudly, not performatively. Just enough to keep the rhythm right. Dr. Klein stared. "Who are you?" "Switch in 2, she said calmly. "You're exhausting her." The nurse didn't argue. She stepped back, chest heaving, eyes wide with relief and confusion. Another shock was delivered. The patient's body jolted again. Still nothing. Epinephrine. "Now," the woman said, glancing at the tray. "You're already late." The intern holding the syringe hesitated, looking to Dr. Klein for confirmation. "Do it," Klein snapped, more out of reflex than conviction. The medication went in. The woman never stopped compressions. Sweat beaded along her hairline, but her movement stayed controlled, efficient. No wasted motion. No panic. Just precision. "Where's cardiology?" someone asked. "They're not getting here in time," she replied. "We stabilize first." Another minute passed. Then another. The monitor twitched. Just a flicker. "Pause compressions," she said. They did. The line wavered, then steadied into a weak, uneven rhythm. "I've got a pulse," the nurse whispered, fingers pressed to the patient's neck. A breath was released collectively, like the room had been holding it hostage. But the woman didn't relax. "Don't celebrate yet," she said. "This is fragile." As if on cue, the rhythm faltered again. "Resume," she ordered. Compression started again, slower now, more deliberate. Dr. Klein's confidence was gone. His voice, when he spoke, was smaller. You said we missed the window." She nodded once. He showed early signs of ventricular instability. "You dismissed them." No accusation. No anger. Just fact. The patient gasped, a shallow, involuntary pull of air. "There," the respiratory therapist said urgently. "He's trying to breathe." "Assist," the woman replied. "Don't fight him." The monitor climbed, steadier this time. Not perfect, but alive. Finally, after what felt like an hour but was barely 3 minutes, the crisis eased just enough for the room to catch up with itself. The code was called. The alarms softened into a steady, merciful rhythm. Richard Halvorsen lay motionless, but breathing. Alive. Silence fell, not the calm kind, but the heavy, stunned kind that comes after everyone realizes something went very wrong, and very right. Dr. Klein cleared his throat. I need your name." The woman removed her gloves slowly, placing them in the bin. "My name is Naomi Carter," she said. Someone frowned. Are you agency staff?" "No. ICU." She shook her head. "Then what department?" She met Dr. Klein's eyes again, and for the first time, there was something like quiet weariness there. "I'm the attending cardiothoracic surgeon," she said. "Transferred here 6 months ago." The room froze. The nurse blinked. "Wait. Dr. Carter?" Naomi nodded. A realization rippled outward, faces draining, mouths parting. One intern whispered, She's the one who published that study on post-op arrhythmias." Another murmured, "She's on the review board." Dr. Klein swallowed hard. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" Naomi looked around the room, at the scrubs, the assumptions, the way no one had bothered to ask. "I did," she said quietly. "Just not loudly enough for anyone who'd already decided who I was." No one had an answer to that. Outside the room, Richard's daughter stood gripping the arm of a plastic chair, tears streaking her face. She hadn't seen any of this, only the panic, the alarms, the way everyone suddenly moved faster. When Naomi stepped out, their eyes met. "He's stable for now," Naomi said gently. "We're taking him to the ICU." The woman sobbed with relief, clutching Naomi's hands. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Naomi squeezed back, just once. "He's not out of danger yet. But he's alive." As the gurney rolled past, staff parted instinctively. No one mistook her for a cleaner now. But the silence that followed her down the corridor wasn't respect. It was reckoning. The ICU was quieter than the trauma bay, but the silence there had weight. Machines hummed softly, monitors pulsed with restrained urgency, and every footstep felt measured, as if the walls themselves demanded respect. Richard Halvorsen was settled into bed 7, sedated, ventilated, alive. Barely, but alive. Naomi Carter stood at the foot of the bed, reviewing the monitor, her hands folded behind her back. She hadn't changed her expression since they'd wheeled him in. No smile of victory. No release of tension. Just focus. Dr. Klein lingered a few feet away, pretending to study the chart while clearly studying her instead. "I didn't recognize you," he finally said. Naomi didn't look at him. "Most people don't." "That's not what I meant." She glanced up then, eyes sharp but tired. "Then say what you do mean." He shifted uncomfortably. "You were, in the hallway. With no white coat. No badge visible." Naomi nodded. "I know. You should wear one. I used to." The words landed heavier than they sounded. She turned back to the patient. "His troponins will spike. Prep for possible cath. And I want neuro checks every hour." "Yes, doctor," the nurse said quickly, too quickly, like she was trying to make up for something. Dr. Klein hesitated again. "Why? Why were you there?" Naomi exhaled slowly. "I was called down to review imaging on another patient. Your trauma bay is on the way. And you just stayed." "I heard the monitor. That was it. No heroics. No destiny. Just someone listening when it mattered." Dr. Klein rubbed a hand over his face. "You know how this looks." Naomi turned fully toward him now. "How it looks, or how it is?" He didn't answer. Down the hall, a group of residents whispered in clusters. Names traveled faster than facts. That was Dr. Carter. The cardiothoracic surgeon. "I thought she worked nights. I thought she was, you know." The sentence never finished. Naomi heard it anyway. She always did. The hospital loved to talk about diversity, posters in break rooms, carefully worded emails from administration. But inside its walls, habits ran deep. Expectations settled on people like dust, invisible until they suffocated you. Naomi had learned early not to fight every assumption. It was exhausting. 6 months ago, when she transferred from a top-tier surgical center on the East Coast, she'd arrived with credentials thick enough to intimidate most departments. Fellowships. Publications. Survival rates that spoke louder than any introduction. Still, on her first day, someone had asked her if she was covering for the unit clerk. Another time, a patient's family had mistaken her for transport staff and asked for water. She'd smiled. Helped. Moved on. Not because it didn't hurt, but because she had learned what anger cost. Tonight, though, the cost had almost been a man's life. Naomi stepped into the small staff lounge adjacent to the ICU. The lights were dim. A vending machine hummed in the corner. She sank into a chair, finally letting the tension settle into her shoulders. A nurse followed her in. Young, earnest, eyes still wide. "Dr. Carter," she said softly. I wanted to say I'm sorry." Naomi looked up. "For what?" "For not listening. For not seeing you." Naomi considered her for a long moment. "You did your job. You questioned what felt wrong. But I let myself get shut down." "So did I," Naomi said quietly. The nurse frowned. "How?" "I didn't push hard enough. I didn't interrupt authority the way I should have. But you shouldn't have had to." Naomi gave a small, tired smile. "And yet." The nurse hesitated. "Is it always like this?" Naomi didn't answer right away. Outside the glass, Richard's monitor pulsed steadily, proof that effort, even delayed, still mattered. "Not always," she said finally. "But often enough." The nurse swallowed. "I won't forget tonight." Naomi nodded. Good. Don't. A few minutes later, the unit secretary poked her head in. Dr. Carter. Administration is asking for a report. About the code. Naomi stood. I'll be there shortly. As she walked back into the ICU, she passed the same hallway where she'd stood earlier, silent, mistaken, dismissed. The space looked different now. People stepped aside. Heads turned. Voices lowered. Respect, finally, but it felt hollow. Because it hadn't come from knowing her. It had come from needing her. Naomi paused by the door to Richard's room and watched him for a moment longer. Alive because someone had intervened. Nearly dead because too many people had assumed. The realization settled deep in her chest, heavy and unresolved. Tonight had exposed more than a medical oversight. It had exposed a system that only listened when it was already too late. And Naomi knew, this wasn't over. Not for her. Not for them. By morning, the hospital had shifted into its daytime rhythm, brighter lights, sharper voices, the illusion of order restored. What hadn't returned was certainty. Richard Halvorsen was still alive. Barely, but undeniably. Naomi stood beside his ICU bed as the night nurse gave report to the day team. Lab values scrolled across the screen. Troponins elevated. Blood pressure unstable but responsive. Neurological status still unknown. He coded twice, the nurse said. Longest downtime was just under 4 minutes. Naomi nodded. We were lucky. Dr. Klein stood at the edge of the group, unusually quiet. He hadn't slept. It showed. He shouldn't have survived that, one resident muttered. Naomi heard him. People say that too often, she replied. And they're wrong more often than they think. When the team dispersed, Naomi stayed behind. She adjusted a setting, checked a line, reviewed the imaging once more. Richard's face looked different in daylight, older, softer. Less like a case and more like a person who had almost vanished. A woman hovered just outside the glass door, twisting a tissue in her hands. Naomi stepped out. You're his daughter. Yes, the woman said quickly. Emily. I'm Dr. Carter, Naomi said. I was with your father during the code. Emily's breath caught. You're the one they said, you're the one who saved him. Naomi shook her head gently. A lot of people worked on him. He fought too. But you saw it, Emily insisted. You saw something they didn't. Naomi studied her face, fear, gratitude, exhaustion all tangled together. Sometimes, she said, it's not about seeing something new. It's about not ignoring what's already there. Emily swallowed hard. They told me he might not wake up. That's still possible, Naomi said honestly. But his chances are better than they were last night. Emily nodded, tears slipping free. Thank you for telling me the truth. Naomi hesitated, then added, if he wakes up, he'll need to make changes. His heart has been asking for attention for a long time. Emily gave a watery laugh. That sounds like him. He ignores everything until it's on fire. Naomi allowed herself a small smile. Down the hall, a group of administrators approached, clipboards, badges, practiced concern. Dr. Carter, one of them said. We'll need a detailed account of last night's events. Naomi folded her arms. Of course. We're particularly interested in the delay before escalation. Naomi met his gaze. So am I. The administrator cleared his throat. This isn't about blame. Naomi's voice stayed calm. Then it should be about systems. He nodded slowly, unsure. Later, in the conference room, Naomi sat across from Dr. Klein and 2 department heads. The air was polite, tense. Richard Halvorsen's survival was remarkable, the chief of medicine said. Given the circumstances. Given the delay, Naomi corrected. A pause. Dr. Klein shifted. I made a judgment call. You dismissed a warning, Naomi said. More than one. He bristled. Are you accusing me? I'm stating facts, she replied evenly. This isn't personal. It's preventable. Silence followed. The chief sighed. What would you have done differently? Naomi didn't hesitate. She walked them through it, early intervention, attention to subtle changes, listening to the nurse who tried to speak up. And wearing your white coat, someone added lightly, attempting humor. Naomi looked at him. Would that have changed the monitor? No one laughed. The meeting ended without resolution, just promises of review, of looking into it. Naomi knew the language well. Back in the ICU, Richard stirred. A twitch of fingers. A shallow groan. Mr. Halvorsen, the nurse said gently. Can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, confused, unfocused. Emily rushed to his side, sobbing openly now. Dad! Dad, you're here. Richard blinked, voice raspy. What happened? You had a heart attack, Emily said. But you're alive. His gaze drifted past her, to Naomi standing quietly at the foot of the bed. That's her, he murmured. The woman. Naomi stepped forward. I'm here, she said softly. He frowned, trying to piece things together. They thought you were cleaning. Naomi didn't deny it. Richard's eyes filled. I remember you. Standing there. Watching. Naomi nodded. I was listening. He swallowed with effort. Thank you. The words were simple. Heavy. Outside the room, staff watched through the glass, some relieved, some uncomfortable. Richard lived. But the question hung unspoken in every corner of the hospital. How close had they come to letting him die, simply because they didn't listen? Naomi felt it settle into her bones. Survival didn't mean justice. And survival didn't mean the story was over. The email arrived just after noon. Naomi read it once. Then again. Subject, Incident Review, Trauma Room 3. From, Office of Clinical Oversight. Body, pending investigation, please refrain from direct patient care outside assigned cases until further notice. She sat very still. Around her, the cardiothoracic wing buzzed with its usual controlled urgency, pages chiming, carts rolling, voices low and clipped. To anyone watching, nothing was wrong. But Naomi felt it instantly. The subtle shift. They weren't thanking her. They were containing her. She folded the phone face down on the desk and stared at the window overlooking the parking structure. Sunlight glinted off windshields. Life went on. A knock sounded. Dr. Carter, the unit coordinator, peeked in. Administration's asking if you can come by again. Conference room B. Naomi stood. I'll be there. Conference room B smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old coffee. 3 administrators sat around the table this time. Dr. Klein was absent. Thank you for coming, Dr. Carter, the woman at the head said, all professional warmth. This is just a procedural step. Naomi Saturday, then why restrict my clinical duties? A pause. It's standard during an incident review. Standard for whom? Naomi asked calmly. Another administrator cleared his throat. There were concerns raised about chain of command. Naomi's jaw tightened. A patient was dying. And your intervention was ultimately successful, the woman said quickly. No one is disputing that. But you acted without being formally assigned to that case. Naomi leaned back. So the issue isn't whether the patient lived. It's about protocol. Naomi smiled faintly. Protocol didn't save him. Silence pressed down. One of the men said, some staff felt undermined. Naomi looked directly at him. Did anyone feel accountable? No one answered. Back in the hallway, whispers followed her again, but different now. Administration's not happy. She embarrassed Klein. They're making an example. Naomi kept walking. In the ICU, Richard was improving slowly. Less sedation. Stronger vitals. Emily was there every hour, scribbling notes, asking questions, watching everything. When Naomi entered, Emily's face lit up. They told me you might not be allowed in here. I'm still allowed to check on him, Naomi said. For now. Emily frowned. That's not right. Naomi shrugged lightly. Hospitals have long memories. Richard stirred, eyes opening. Doctor? Naomi moved closer. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck, he rasped. But I remember you. He glanced at the doorway, lowering his voice. They don't like you much, do they? Naomi smiled sadly. I'm used to that. That's wrong, he said, more strength in his voice than before. You saved my life. I did my job. He shook his head weakly. No. You did more than they wanted you to. Emily watched them, something hardening behind her gratitude. Later that afternoon, Naomi received another message, this one informal. From Dr. Klein. We need to talk. They met in a quiet stairwell, away from ears. I didn't ask for this, Klein said quickly. Administration's nervous. Naomi crossed her arms. Because a patient lived? Because you made them look bad. Naomi studied him. You made yourself look bad. He flinched. That's not fair. Neither was last night, she replied. Klein exhaled sharply. Do you know how this plays out? They'll call it a communication breakdown. No names. No consequences. And me? They'll say you overstepped. Naomi nodded slowly. Of course they will. You could have worn your coat, he muttered. Announced yourself. Naomi's eyes hardened. And if I had been a man in navy scrubs, would you have needed the coat? Klein said nothing. Naomi took a step back. This isn't about me. It's about what happens next time. When I'm not there. He looked away. That evening, Naomi sat alone in her office, staring at the same white coat folded over the chair. She hadn't worn it in months. Not because she forgot who she was, but because she was tired of proving it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Emily. If there's anything I can do, please tell me. Naomi typed, erased, then typed again. Just tell the truth, she finally wrote. When they ask. She didn't know yet how hard that would be. Outside, the hospital lights flickered on as dusk settled. Richard Halvorsen was alive. But the system that nearly killed him was already protecting itself. And Naomi Carter stood at the center of a quiet storm she hadn't asked for, but would not step away from. 2 days later, the narrative began to change. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just enough to blur the edges. Naomi noticed it in the wording of emails first. Phrases like, unexpected cardiac event, and, rapid response initiated appropriately. The delay that nearly killed Richard Halvorsen softened into vagueness. Responsibility dissolved into passive language. No one was lying. They were doing something more dangerous. They were editing. Naomi sat in the observation room as a junior administrator read from a printed report, voice steady, rehearsed. Based on preliminary findings, the care team responded within acceptable timeframes given the patient's presentation. Naomi interrupted calmly. That's not accurate. The administrator blinked. It's consistent with documentation. Documentation that was written after the fact, Naomi replied. I was there. The escalation was delayed. A senior physician cleared his throat. Dr. Carter, we appreciate your passion, but memory can be subjective in high-stress situations. Naomi leaned forward. The monitor data isn't subjective. Silence followed. We're not here to assign fault, the administrator said again. Naomi's voice stayed even. Then you're here to ensure it happens again. After the meeting, Naomi walked past the nurse's station. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Eyes followed her, not hostile, but wary. She had become something dangerous. A reminder. In the ICU, Richard was sitting up now, color slowly returning to his face. Emily was reading aloud from her phone, half laughing, half crying. They're calling you the mystery doctor, she said to Naomi. Apparently the internet loves you. Naomi frowned. What do you mean? Emily hesitated. Someone posted about what happened. Not names. Just, what they saw. Naomi felt a familiar tightening in her chest. That's not good. It's not bad either, Emily said quietly. People are asking questions. Naomi glanced at Richard. Did you talk to anyone? He nodded slowly. A reporter tried. I didn't say much. Just the truth. Emily added, administration asked me to stick to their statement. Naomi exhaled. And? Emily's jaw set. I didn't. That night, Naomi received a call from clinical oversight. We've concluded the preliminary review, the voice said smoothly. You're cleared to return to full duties. Relief flickered, brief, cautious. There's just one thing, the voice continued. We'd prefer if you didn't speak publicly about the incident. Naomi closed her eyes. I haven't. We'd like to keep it that way. And if I'm asked? A pause. We trust your discretion. The line went dead. The next morning, Naomi found her white coat hanging on her office door. Clean. Pressed. A message pinned to it, welcome back. She stared at it for a long time before pushing it aside. During rounds, Dr. Klein avoided her eyes. Orders were followed. Courtesy returned. On the surface, everything was normal again. Too normal. In the cafeteria, Naomi overheard two residents whispering. They say the patient would have crashed no matter what. Yeah. Timing didn't really matter. Naomi stopped walking. She turned slowly. It mattered. The residents froze, flushing. I'm not here to scare you, Naomi said gently. I'm here to tell you the truth. If you learn to accept these explanations, you'll stop questioning things that can kill people. They nodded, chastened. But the damage was already spreading. By the end of the week, the story had settled into something neat and unthreatening. A scare. A save. No mistakes worth naming. Except Richard Halvorsen knew better. And so did his daughter. Emily stood beside Naomi one afternoon, watching her father walk slowly with a physical therapist. They're trying to make it go away, Emily said. Naomi nodded. They always do. That's not okay. No, Naomi agreed. It isn't. Emily took a breath. I gave a statement. Detailed. Names, times, everything. Naomi turned to her sharply. Emily. I know, Emily said. But someone has to say it out loud. Naomi searched her face. You don't owe me that. I owe my father that, Emily replied. That evening, an email circulated hospital-wide. Subject, external review initiated. The words rippled through the building like an electric current. Administration hadn't wanted this. But it was happening anyway. Naomi stood alone in the same hallway where she'd once been dismissed, watching staff move with uneasy purpose. Truth had a way of doing that. It didn't shout. It waited. And then it refused to stay buried. The external review changed the air inside the hospital. Not immediately. Not dramatically. But in the way pressure changes before a storm, subtle, unsettling, impossible to ignore once you felt it. People began choosing their words more carefully. Meetings grew longer. Hallway conversations lowered to murmurs that stopped the moment someone unfamiliar walked past. Naomi felt it most in the pauses. The half-seconds before people answered her questions. The careful neutrality in voices that used to be sharp. The way administrators suddenly smiled too often. Truth had entered the building, and it made everyone nervous. Richard Halvorsen was transferred out of the ICU on day 9. He walked slowly, one hand gripping the rail, but he walked. Nurses clapped quietly as he passed. Someone whispered, "That's the guy." Richard heard them. He stopped, turning toward Naomi, who stood a few steps behind him. "They keep calling me lucky," he said. Naomi met his eyes. "You were." He shook his head. "No. I was ignored." The words landed harder than any accusation. That afternoon, Naomi was asked, formally this time, to give her account to the External Review Board. 3 physicians from outside institutions sat across from her, notebooks open, expressions unreadable. "Start from when you first noticed the patient," one said. Naomi did. Calmly. Precisely. No embellishment. No anger. She described the monitor's subtle changes. The dismissals. The delay. The moment the line went flat. "Why didn't you identify yourself immediately?" another reviewer asked. Naomi didn't bristle. She'd been waiting for that question. "I spoke," she said. "I was heard. I was not believed." A pen paused mid-scratch. "Do you believe bias played a role?" the third reviewer asked carefully. Naomi inhaled. This was the question everyone danced around. "Yes," she said simply. "I believe assumptions were made about who I was, and what I knew, before I ever opened my mouth." Silence followed. "Thank you," the first reviewer said quietly. "That's all for now." When Naomi stepped back into the hallway, she felt lighter, and heavier all at once. Later that evening, Dr. Klein approached her near the elevators. He looked different. Smaller somehow. "They interviewed me today," he said. Naomi nodded. "They asked why I dismissed the nurse's concern." "And?" Naomi asked. Klein swallowed. "I said I was confident." Naomi waited. "They asked what that confidence was based on," he continued. "And I didn't have a good answer." The elevator dinged. Doors opened. Neither of them stepped in. "I should have listened," Klein said finally. "To you. To the nurse. To the data." Naomi studied him. "That's not an apology." He met her eyes. "I'm sorry." The word didn't erase anything. But it mattered. Naomi nodded once. "Do better next time." The elevator doors closed without either of them inside. 2 days later, the hospital received notice, findings would be shared publicly. Administration called an emergency meeting. "This could damage our reputation," one executive said, wringing his hands. "It could save lives," Naomi replied. They didn't look at her. In the days that followed, journalists lingered outside the hospital gates. Cameras. Microphones. Questions shouted into the air. Naomi avoided them. Richard didn't. Standing beside his daughter, thinner but standing tall, he spoke plainly. "I was lying in that bed while people decided I was stable," he said. "I wasn't." One doctor saw it. Others didn't want to hear it. Why do you think that was? A reporter asked. Richard glanced at Naomi, then back at the camera. You should ask yourselves why it took a crisis for anyone to listen to her. The clip aired that night. By morning, the hospital's phone lines were jammed. Emails poured in, from former patients, from nurses, from people who had stories of their own. Stories about not being heard. About warnings dismissed. About outcomes that hadn't ended as well. Naomi read them alone in her office, one after another. She felt less alone than she ever had. A nurse knocked softly. Dr. Carter. They want you in conference room A. Inside, the review board's final report lay printed on the table. Findings: delay in escalation. Failure to heed staff concerns. Cultural factors contributing to breakdown in care. No names in bold. But no hiding either. Corrective actions were listed. Training. Accountability measures. Protocol changes. It wasn't justice. But it was movement. As Naomi left the room, she passed the hallway where it had all begun. No mop. No assumptions. Just a woman walking with purpose. People looked at her differently now. Not because she'd saved a life. But because she'd refused to let the truth be erased. And the hospital, whether it wanted to or not, had finally been forced to listen. The hospital didn't change overnight. People liked to pretend it did, liked the neatness of that idea. A report released. Policies updated. A few carefully worded apologies. Then back to business. But real change never arrived with announcements. It crept in quietly, through discomfort. Naomi felt it in the way nurses spoke more firmly during rounds now. In the way residents paused before dismissing a concern. In the way silence, once used to smooth things over, began to feel dangerous instead of polite. Still, not everyone welcomed it. A senior surgeon passed Naomi in the corridor one morning and said, not unkindly, "You've made things complicated." Naomi stopped. "Medicine is complicated." He nodded, unconvinced, and walked on. In room 512, Richard Halvorsen sat by the window, sunlight warming his hands. His color was better now. His breathing steadier. But his eyes carried something new, an awareness that hadn't been there before. Naomi reviewed his chart one last time before discharge. "You're cleared to go home tomorrow," she said. "Cardiac rehab starts next week. No shortcuts." Richard smiled faintly. "I've had enough shortcuts for one lifetime." Emily stood beside him, arms crossed, protective even now. "I keep thinking about that hallway," Richard said suddenly. Naomi looked up. "Which part?" "The waiting," he said. "Lying there while people decided I wasn't urgent." Naomi didn't interrupt. "I heard the alarms change," he continued. "I knew something was wrong. But I couldn't make my body move. I couldn't speak." Emily's eyes filled. She looked away. Richard swallowed. "If you hadn't been there." Naomi held his gaze. "But I was." "Yes," he said. "And that's what scares me." She understood immediately. "You're thinking about the next person," she said. He nodded. "What if you hadn't been walking by? What if you'd listened to them instead of the monitor?" Naomi closed the chart gently. "That's why this matters," she said. "Not because of me. Because of who comes next." After she left the room, Naomi paused at the nurse's station. A young resident was presenting a case, hesitant, careful. I might be wrong," he said, "but the trend here concerns me." The attending listened. That hadn't always happened. Naomi moved on without comment. But not everyone learned. A week later, she was called to consult on another patient, different floor, different team. Similar early signs. Subtle changes that asked for attention instead of panic. The attending waved them off. Let's wait and see. Naomi felt the familiar tightening in her chest. She spoke up. Firmly. Publicly. The room went quiet. Eyes flicked between her and the monitor. Finally, the attending nodded. All right. Let's escalate. The patient stabilized before things spiraled. No code. No alarms. Just prevention. Later, alone in the stairwell, Naomi rested her forehead against the cool metal railing. This was the cost no one talked about. Carrying vigilance. Being the one who always had to push a little harder. Speak a little louder. Refuse to be convenient. She thought of all the times she hadn't. Times she'd stayed quiet to keep the peace, to avoid being labeled difficult. How many near misses had there been? How many stories that didn't end like Richard's? Her phone buzzed. A message from Emily. Dad keeps telling everyone you're the reason he's alive. Naomi typed back slowly. Tell him to take his meds and scare fewer people. A moment later, another message arrived. He says he's telling the truth. Naomi smiled despite herself. That evening, as Naomi walked through the hospital lobby, she passed a woman in navy scrubs standing near the wall. The woman looked up, startled, then smiled uncertainly. Naomi recognized the look. Assumed invisible. Assumed small. Naomi stopped. Are you on this unit? She asked. The woman nodded. Yes, ma'am. I'm new. Naomi smiled gently. Good. Then let me tell you something. The woman leaned in. Never let them decide who you are before you speak, Naomi said. And if they try, speak anyway. The woman's eyes shone. Thank you, doctor. Naomi walked on, heart heavy but steady. Because change wasn't loud. It was cumulative. Built from moments like this, moments of almost loss, almost silence, almost death. Richard Halvorsen would go home. Others might not. And Naomi Carter knew now, more clearly than ever, that the real work wasn't saving lives in dramatic moments. It was fighting the quiet systems that decided, again and again, whose voice mattered before the monitor ever screamed. The public release of the review landed on a Thursday morning. By noon, it was everywhere. Not just medical circles or hospital admin inboxes, but morning radio, local news, social feeds filled with clipped headlines and uncomfortable questions. External review finds delayed response in cardiac emergency. Patient survives after doctor intervenes despite dismissal. Hospital culture under scrutiny. Naomi didn't read most of them. She didn't need to. She felt it in the way the hospital entrance buzzed with reporters, in the way security suddenly stood straighter, in the way administrators stopped pretending this would quietly fade. Conference room A filled to capacity, department heads, board members, legal counsel. Naomi sat near the end of the table, hands folded, posture composed. No one asked her to speak at first. They argued around her instead. This is being framed unfairly. We followed protocol. The language is inflammatory. We need to protect the institution. Naomi listened. Then the board chair turned to her. Dr. Carter. You were present. What do you think? The room went still. Naomi stood, not dramatically, not angrily. Just deliberately. I think we're asking the wrong question, she said. A few people shifted. This isn't about how we're being framed, she continued. It's about why the framing feels believable to so many people. Silence. She went on. A man nearly died because early warning signs were dismissed. Not maliciously. Not incompetently. Comfortably. One executive frowned. Are you saying? I'm saying this didn't happen because of one bad call, Naomi said. It happened because too many people learned, over time, that speaking up wasn't rewarded. She glanced around the room. Including me. That landed. Last week, Naomi said, voice steady, a patient lived because someone intervened. But the real story is that he almost didn't, because the system didn't want to be interrupted. No one interrupted her now. We can defend our reputation, she finished. Or we can deserve it. When she sat down, the room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then the board chair nodded slowly. Thank you, Dr. Carter. Outside the conference room, news cameras waited. Naomi avoided them, slipping down a side hallway she'd walked 100 times before, only now it felt different. She wasn't invisible anymore. And that came with its own weight. That afternoon, Richard Halvorsen was officially discharged. He insisted on walking out without a wheelchair. I walked in here, he said stubbornly. I'll walk out. Naomi stood with Emily near the exit as he signed final paperwork. He looked at Naomi, serious now. They're calling me brave. Naomi shook her head. You survived. That's not the same thing, he said. Brave is telling the truth when it's uncomfortable. Emily nodded. We're not done. Naomi studied them, father and daughter, bonded now not just by blood, but by a line they'd crossed together. Neither am I, Naomi said. As Richard walked through the sliding doors into sunlight, a reporter called out, Mr. Halvorsen. One question, who saved your life? Richard stopped. He turned back toward the hospital. Toward Naomi. Someone who was listening, he said. When no one else was. That clip went viral. Not because it was dramatic. Because it was devastatingly calm. By evening, messages flooded in, from nurses across the country, from doctors who'd been dismissed, from people who recognized themselves in the quiet parts of the story. Naomi sat alone in her office, reading them one by one. Some were angry. Some grateful. Some still afraid. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of it all pressed down. And then something else rise up alongside it. Connection. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever felt unheard, overlooked, or dismissed when it mattered most, please subscribe to Beat Stories HQ and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this exist because people recognize themselves in them, and choose not to stay silent. Naomi turned off her phone and stood. Tomorrow, there would be more meetings. More resistance. More careful language. But tonight, something had shifted beyond the hospital walls. The story was no longer theirs to manage. It belonged to everyone who'd ever watched a warning sign flicker, and wondered if speaking up would matter. And for the first time since that long night in Trauma Room 3, Naomi allowed herself to believe. Maybe it would. The hospital released a statement the following Monday. It was longer than most. Careful. Apologetic without naming villains. But it was public. And that alone was new. Naomi read it once, then folded the paper and set it aside. Statements didn't change behavior. Consequences did, or at least, pressure sometimes forced people to pretend long enough for habits to shift. In the days that followed, tangible changes appeared. Mandatory escalation training. Anonymous reporting channels actually monitored. A revised protocol that required attending physicians to document rationale when overriding nurse concerns. Small things. Hard-won things. Dar. Klein requested a formal meeting with Naomi. They sat across from each other in a neutral office, door closed. I've been placed on corrective supervision, he said plainly. Naomi nodded. I deserved it, he added. She didn't contradict him. They asked me to mentor residents on listening during codes, he said with a strained smile. The irony isn't lost on me. Naomi studied his face. He looked tired. Humbled. Then teach them honestly, she said. That's how this means something. He nodded. I will. Outside, Naomi passed a bulletin board newly plastered with flyers, "Speak up. We're listening." She hoped they meant it. In the cardiac rehab wing, Richard Halvorsen returned for his first session. Slower. Thinner. Alive. He waved when he saw Naomi. I told them you'd show up. I didn't promise, Naomi replied lightly. He lowered his voice. They asked if I wanted to sue. Naomi raised an eyebrow. I said no, he continued. This wasn't about money. Emily joined them, arms folded. It's about making sure the next person doesn't need luck. Naomi smiled. Exactly. That afternoon, Naomi received an invitation, not mandatory. Not disciplinary. A panel discussion. Topic: Bias, Hierarchy, and Patient Safety. Speaker requested, Dr. Naomi Carter. She stared at the email for a long time before accepting. The auditorium was full. Not packed with applause or enthusiasm, but with attention. Nurses. Residents. Attendings. People who usually left early stayed seated. Naomi stood at the podium, hands resting lightly on the edges. I'm not here to tell a heroic story, she began. I'm here to talk about a near failure. She described the night without embellishment. The hallway. The assumptions. The delay. She didn't name names. I wasn't ignored because I was quiet, she said. I was ignored because someone had already decided who I was. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Bias doesn't always look like hostility, Naomi continued. Sometimes it looks like comfort. Like certainty. Like not being curious. She paused. And patients pay for that. When she finished, no one clapped at first. Then someone did. Then more. Afterward, a young nurse approached her, eyes bright and nervous. I spoke up last night, she said. I wouldn't have before. Naomi nodded. Good. Another resident said, I caught myself almost dismissing a concern. Almost. Naomi met his gaze. Almost is where change starts. The hospital hadn't transformed. But it had cracked. And through those cracks, something important was beginning to push through. That evening, Naomi walked past Trauma Room 3. It looked smaller than she remembered. Quieter. She stood there for a moment, remembering the flatline, the chaos, the weight of stepping forward when no one expected you to. Then she turned away. Because the goal was never to be remembered. It was to make sure fewer people had to stand where she once did, unheard, unrecognized, and forced to choose between silence and someone else's life. The hallway lights hummed softly overhead. And for once, Naomi didn't feel invisible beneath them. Months passed. Not quietly, but steadily. The hospital's new protocols settled into routine, awkward at first, then slowly accepted. People complained. People adapted. The noise of resistance softened into the dull work of adjustment. Naomi noticed the difference in ways no report could measure. Nurses interrupted attendings, and weren't shut down. Residents asked questions without apologizing for them. Monitors were watched more closely. Voices carried further. It wasn't perfect. But it was alive. Naomi was promoted to lead a cross-department safety council, not as a reward, but as a responsibility. She accepted without celebration. Change didn't need a parade. It needed guardians. Richard Halvorsen completed rehab. He regained strength, then confidence, then something like purpose. One afternoon, he stopped by Naomi's office unannounced, holding 2 cups of coffee. I figured you earned this, he said, setting one down. Naomi raised an eyebrow. Caffeine's not exactly cardiac approved. He smiled. Decough. I've learned my lesson. They sat for a moment, comfortable. I'm speaking at a patient advocacy group tonight, Richard said. They asked me what justice looked like. Naomi waited. I told them justice isn't revenge, he said. It's prevention. Naomi nodded. That's a good answer. Emily joined them later, excited. They're implementing a listening protocol at another hospital too, she said. They referenced this case. Naomi felt something warm stir in her chest, quiet, steady. That's how it spreads, she said. One evening, Naomi received a handwritten note in her mailbox. I didn't survive, it read. But my sister did, because a nurse spoke up after hearing your story. Naomi held the paper for a long time. This was the part no one filmed. The ripple effect. In Trauma Room 3, a plaque was installed, not with Naomi's name, but with words. Listen first. Act early. Naomi paused in front of it one night after a late shift. She traced the letters lightly, then turned away. Because justice wasn't about being seen. It was about being heard, before it was too late. Years later, the story was told differently. Not as a scandal. Not as a viral moment. Not even as a near tragedy. It was told as a turning point. Naomi Carter was older now. Not by much, but enough that the lines at the corners of her eyes showed the weight of long nights and careful decisions. She still wore navy scrubs most days. She still didn't always wear her white coat. She didn't need it anymore. The hospital looked the same from the outside, glass, steel, a promise of safety, but inside, the rhythm had changed. Not perfectly. Not permanently. But meaningfully. In orientation rooms, new staff heard a story about a patient who nearly died because early warning signs were dismissed. They weren't told the doctor's name. They weren't shown a face. They were told what mattered. Listen when someone hesitates. Question comfort. Act before certainty. Naomi preferred it that way. On a quiet afternoon, she stood in the hallway outside Trauma Room 3, now renovated, brighter, better equipped. A code team passed her, moving fast but not frantic. Clear commands. Sharp focus. The patient lived. Naomi watched from a distance, hands folded, invisible in the best way. A young doctor stopped beside her. Dr. Carter? Yes. I just wanted to say, they told us about you in training. Naomi smiled faintly. They shouldn't have. They didn't say your name, the doctor said quickly. Just what you did. Naomi nodded. Good. Later that evening, Naomi visited a community center across town. A small gathering. Folding chairs. Coffee in paper cups. Richard Halvorsen stood at the front, healthy now, voice strong. Emily sat in the first row, watching him with quiet pride. This isn't a story about blame, Richard said to the room. It's a story about listening. Naomi sat in the back, unnoticed. That night, Richard continued, someone heard what others ignored. And because of that, I get to stand here. He paused. But more importantly, other people get to stand here too. After the talk, a woman approached Naomi, eyes damp. My mother died in a hospital, she said softly. No one listened to her. Naomi didn't rush to respond. She never did. I'm sorry, she said. I wish this story could change the past. The woman shook her head. It changes the future. That night, Naomi walked home under a sky washed clean by rain. The city hummed around her, cars, voices, life moving forward. She thought of the hallway where she'd once stood, mistaken and dismissed. Of the monitor that screamed when silence had lasted too long. Of the choice she'd made to step forward anyway. Legacy wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It lived in moments where someone spoke up sooner. Where a warning wasn't waved away. Where a life didn't have to rely on luck. Naomi reached her door and paused, listening to the quiet inside her apartment. A quiet that felt earned. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to Beat Stories HQ and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this matter because they remind us that listening, truly listening, can save lives. Naomi Carter turned off the light and rested, knowing that tomorrow, somewhere, a monitor would flicker. And someone would listen in time.